How's it going, everybody? So I decided I was going to make a quick video about the Clouser Minnow. It's probably everybody's first fly, or one of the first flies everybody learned how to tie. I figured, there's no right or wrong way to tie a Clouser, but I figured I'd give some tips about how I like to tie them, and it actually help them fish a little better and maybe hold up a little longer as well. First things first, the hook I like to use is a Mustad 3407. These are not typically considered fly tying hooks, but I find they're about the perfect size and shape for a Clouser. They're a perfect length. They're also a little bit heavier wire, and they are a saltwater hook. So I like to tie all my Clousers on saltwater hook just for the extra durability and the fact that I can take any Clouser I tie into salt without having to worry. These are a size 2. That's probably my most used size for a Clouser. It seems to be the most versatile for the fishing I do. First thing, you got to have a strong thread. 210 denier is what I like to use. Some guys like to use 140, but I find that tends to be a little bit too small. Occasionally I end up breaking the thread when I'm tying a Clouser. I like to put a lot of pressure on it. Anything 210 denier, some of the GSP threads will work. I mean, you could tie with Kevlar if you wanted. Just something strong is important. So start your thread right around the center of the hook and build up a bump. Just a small thread bump, and then jump your thread in front and build another bump. That's going to be the seat that your eyes sit in. Clip your tag end off. Selecting eyes, a lot of people ask what eyes I use for Clousers or what eyes they should use. Some people like to use the painted lead eyes, something like these, like the medium lead eyes. Those work fine. Most people use them for Clousers. I like, on my larger Clousers, I like to use these. They come in chrome and gold. These are the Spirit River eyes. They've actually got a little indentation on each side, and it allows you, if you wanted to paint eyes in there or put 3D tape eyes, or the just the regular 3D molded eyes in there, you can put whatever eyes you want in there and put a little dot of epoxy or clear head cement, and it'll lock them into place. Those, I think, make the fly look a little bit better. The eyes I like to use on probably 90% of my Clousers are large brass eyes. I go up a size to large because brass isn't as dense as lead, so you get about the same weight as the medium lead eyes. Also, it adds a little bit of flash. People ask about the salt water with them. Yeah, they do rust and they do oxidize a little bit, but these flies, they're so cheap to make, and usually, brass eyes aren't that expensive. These are the large Spirit River eyes. I think a whole pack of them is about $3.99, and I think there's 25 of them in there, so it's not that bad. And usually the good thing, the hooks are strong. You can get 3 or 4 flies out of each hook. By that I mean when they get tore up and everything, you can just slice them off with a razor blade and start fresh with the hook. Just throw the eyes away. But I just like the fact that when you're fishing a fresh fly, it's got those real bright, flashy gold eyes on there. Before I attach my eyes, I like to put a good dot of the Loctite gel. This stuff really prevents those eyes from spinning around the hook. I like to use the gel because it stays in place. But the main thing I have a problem with on Clousers is the eyes spin after you catch 2 or 3 fish, and the fly becomes a pain in the butt to fish. So give you 2 or 3 real tight thread wraps in one direction, and then work on kind of twisting the eyes back with your fingers and then locking them back with thread the other direction. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work because that Loctite gel will bite pretty quick. But once you get them straight on the hook, and always check if they're straight with the hook from the front view as well, then build up a pretty good solid base underneath. This will prevent those eyes from sliding back and forth down and up the hook. Then jump your thread up right behind the eye. To go over the eyes, you always want to use your lighter color of bucktail. So in this case, I'm going to tie a chartreuse and white one. So the white would be over the eyes, because since the eyes are on top of the hook will ride like that in the water. So you want the belly of your fly to be over top of the eyes. Most of your bait fish have a white belly or the lighter color, so you always want to make sure to do that. Take a small clump of bucktail. Let's see. like so. This is one step that a lot of people just don't do, and it really does kind of mess up your Clousers. You can leave it heavy like this and make a really bulky Clouser. Some people don't like tying half and halves or any of the other, the Clousers with the feathers inside, or any other kind of bulky Clouser, or like a 3 tie-in bucktail Clouser, but they just like to tie 2 of these really thick. That works, but what I like to do is, for my Clousers, I like to fish them pretty thin. If you look at some of the original Clousers, they are a lot thinner than what you see most people fishing, and I think it makes a difference. The easiest way to do this is get your normal clump of bucktail, and you should always do this step where you grab the tips. First off, pull the really long tips out because you don't want to have those blunt ends in the fly when you trim them at the end. So you got that clump. Move your fingers to the top, grab those tips, and then just slide all that under fur or the shorter fur out. You see how much just came out? That really helps you thin these flies out, and you can keep them that small, thin bait fish profile that you want it to be. And you see, if you keep stroking, you'll keep pulling some more out as well. Like so. And you don't need them all to be the same length because that'll let it taper off. You want them to be a little bit different, but you don't want to have short pieces down here. Now, this is the time where you come to measure how long you want your Clouser to be. So what you can do is use something, the size Clouser I tend to use the most is about the length of my finger. So I like to use that as my judge, maybe drape over just a little bit. And at this point, use whatever you want to use to measure it, whether it be a point on your vise, a point on your hand, whatever. Lay it on there. Then you clip your bucktail before you tie it in. A lot of people like to tie it in and then clip it, but that really makes the head messy and it makes it really hard to clean up. So clip it at the length you want it. Clip it at a slight angle. This is a trick from Lefty Cray. A lot of his videos show you about doing this. Clip it at a slight angle and then take whatever head cement you use. I use Sally Hansen, hard as nails, just clear fingernail polish, and dab little drop of head cement onto the butts of the bucktail where you're going to tie it in. That way, when you tie it in, it ties in as one large piece. So one thing I like to do, I like to lay it on the near side of the hook to me and do a couple loose wraps and then really crank it down. And you see, if you lay it on that near side and then really crank it down, it kind of sits right on top of the hook. And you really get it tied in right on top of the hook that way. And you see how small of a tie-in point that is. That's because you didn't have to trim it afterwards and cover it all up. And since you stroked all those thin fibers out, when you go to lay this over the eyes, you don't have all those pieces, straggly all over the place. So now, jump your thread behind the eyes. This is the part that you can skip, or you can do it, there's multiple ways to do this. Some people like to tie it down really tight right behind the eyes and let it flare. That works just fine. I like to kind of pull up on the hair and space some wraps down the hook shank. That way it keeps that body nice and on top of the hook. And then when you're coming back, lay your wraps into those same slots. So you've really kind of just got these X wraps on top of the fly, capturing right back into there on the first wrap behind the eyes, and then wrap your thread back to the front of the hook. So you've got the bottom half of the Clouser done. This is where having a rotary vise helps. You can just invert your fly. This is where you tie in your flash. Since I'm tying in a chartreuse and white, I do like to use 2 colors of flash. I like to use pearl and chartreuse, and I'm going to match them with where they are in the fly. You don't need much flash. A lot of people go overboard on flash, and you really don't need it. Like to get 2 or 3 strands of each color. I'd say that's about right, because you're going to fold them over. That's the way I like to tie them in, at least. I like to tie in the pearl, fold it over, and then tie in the chartreuse right on top of it. So if you take your pearl crystal flash, wrap it around your hook, around your thread, lift it up, and make sure you're doing this at the center point of the flash. That way it'll extend all the way to the back of the fly. You can kind of just work that around the hook at this point. And then take your chartreuse and same thing. Take about 3 or 4 strands at the most. Clip them off right at the zip tie. Fold them around the thread. And let them slide down the thread and then tie them in on top. And same thing, I like to split it around the hook now because that'll prevent it from getting real crazy later when you're fishing it. Because once you get your chartreuse bucktail tied in on top, it'll kind of lock everything underneath in place and it won't let it, bounce around and go crazy. So at this point you would tie in your chartreuse. You could also, if you're trying to do a 3-tiered fly, a lot of people like to put a lateral line with a different color bucktail. You could do that now too, but I like to just keep it 2 colors. That makes it the simplest, and that's the thing with Clousers. You're just tying them quick. You want to get them cranked out so you can get back to fishing. Same thing, take another clump of bucktail, about the same size as the first clump, like so. And just repeat the same steps. This piece actually looks like it might be a little thin, so you can kind of pull up on a few to get them lined up. But repeat the same steps. Grab the tips of the bucktail and pull all that under stuff out, the thinner, shorter stuff out. And then same thing, measure it out to where it'll be the same length, like so. Always make sure you don't have any of those really long fibers, because then you'll have to trim them out at the end or something and it'll have a blunt edge. You don't want that. You want it to be nice and the points are nice and smooth at the end. Got some of that hair hanging on the vise. So measure it out right around in there. Same thing, cut it at an angle. Just a small, see if I can get that on camera, small angle like so. And then take your head cement again. And it only takes a little drop with this. It doesn't take much. Just enough to where when you tie it in, it'll bite into all that bucktail, and you'll have the glue all the way through, so you don't have individual pieces coming out. Same thing, start it on the near side of the thread, or of the hook, and work your small or your loose wraps through there. And then bite it down. And if done correctly, it should lay right on top. Like so. And that's that thin bait fish profile that we're looking for. Now, all that's really left to do is kind of make a smooth nose on this fly. It's not hard to overdo the nose. You really don't want a very big nose on a Clouser. I like to keep them fairly small, so I usually just cover it up. Even if a little bit of that chartreuse is bleeding through, it doesn't really matter. So, whip finish. I like to whip finish back right up against the eyes, because typically your whip finish builds up a little bit more thread, so if anything, put it all the way to the back and it'll help make the head look more tapered. And get that done. And then snip your thread off close. So, it's pretty much a finished Clouser. You can pull it out of the vise and look. It looks like, you can see, you can play with the bucktail a little bit and get it evenly distributed around the hook. But it's that smooth baitfish profile that you're looking for. And if you look, I like to have the flash extending out just that little bit. It just looks a little bit more natural to me, and it also, that flash is a little bit more supple than the bucktail, so a lot of times you'll get that flash tail behind it. What you can do now, you can take your head cement. You always want to coat the heads of this fly with head cement. I like to, I don't typically use 2-part epoxy unless I'm tying like an order for somebody and they ask for it. But usually I like to just coat the thread pretty evenly with Sally Hansen's and take it the brush and take it right over the eyes and get a good coat over that bucktail that crosses over the eyes. Sometimes that stuff goes on kind of watery and you get a bubble of extra cement. That's okay. But another thing I like to do is kind of use the brush sideways and dab a little bit of it on those thread wraps going back down the back of the fly. That way you don't have that stuff splitting and going everywhere after it bounces off some rocks or some oyster shells or something. You don't have to worry about this hair getting cut. Because nothing looks more annoying than a Clouser that's got all this hair that's all stripped. Usually Sally Hansen's will provide a hard enough coating to where if you're bouncing into stuff, usually you don't have to worry about it. That's also why I like using these brass eyes, because they're really deep channeled and the hair tends to sit down in there. So when that fly is bouncing on stuff, typically these eyes are what's hitting it and the hair isn't what's actually hitting it. So that helps. The good thing about Sally Hansen's, it dries pretty quick. I do like to do 2 coats just for durability, but you don't necessarily have to. Like I said, you're not going to get multiple days out of a Clouser unless you're tying them with super air or like a synthetic like Steve Farrar blend, that SF Flash. It doesn't really matter what you tie them with as long as it's a good multicolored fly. I don't like to tie a solid color Clouser unless it's solid white. And the only synthetics I really do tie them with is that SF. So you can use a bunch of stuff. There's plenty of materials out there, but between bucktail and SF, that seems to work best for me. But hope this helped you out. The only step left to do, like I said, I'm going to put one more coat of Sally Hansen's on this after this dries in a minute or two, and that'll be ready to fish. So if you guys have any other questions or have any other flies you want to know how to tie, just shoot us an email or a comment on this post, and I'd be happy to do one. Thanks.